Listen, I just want to frame up real quickly and maybe start with a quick poll here. I know I want to better understand kind of what position you're in. I know there's still a lot of uncertainty in the air, but hybrid seems to kind of be the word of the week and maybe for a while now. And today we want to talk a little bit more closely about how we can support you in your planning for the fall and kind of go through the ins and outs of the different types of activities you can provide for your students. So again, thank you for joining us. Really excited to have these discussions. But Chris Murner, you want to give us a better sense of what we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, well, when we were trying to plan out this sort of series for the summer, we're kind of gaming out what we wanted to talk about every few weeks. And we thought, about this time of year, it'd be good to talk about synchronous versus asynchronous and how to pull it together. And boy, if in the last few weeks have I not read hybrid learning and, a little bit in person, and then everybody's going to go back online, and sort of this varied sort of smorgasbord of online learning with a dash of in person, or for the majority of districts that I've seen, I know there are some that are full in person, but man, I think the timing is pretty good, and we're really looking to hear from you guys, about your struggles and about what you're excited about, and what you're nervous about. We're here to help, and I think learn from you guys too, so that we can dial in. We've got one more of these at the end of August on the 20th, and really want to be sure that we're dialing it in so that it's helpful to you and not something that that doesn't speak into your need. So I'm really excited, and I know Chris, you and I have been talking a little bit about how it's still a little uncertain around the edges, and I think the next week or so it's got to firm up more, right? Because school's on us. It's almost August.
Right. It's hard to believe it's the end of July and there's still so much wet in the cement, and no one knows how, a month from now things will be. And we're feeling that as teachers, we're feeling that as parents ourselves, with, well, what are your kids doing? What are you going to do? And it seems like we're all solving this individually as parents, as educators. That's part of the reason why we really want to, I'm going to steal your title, Chris. Better together to figure these things out together.
Yeah, we need to forge ahead. And Susan, it is great to see you as always. Thank you for always joining us. And I'm hearing from a lot of folks that hybrid is right. Combos, there's a lot of combinations going on here. And then of course, sorry, I forgot to mention, of course, we have our Katie, who is manning the chat and just a great support to all of these webinars. And we're sharing the poll results here very quickly. It looks like the biggest majority is yes, in person, but we have to make online. And so if you haven't read it, which I hope you have before joining us today, Chris Murner wrote a blog post a week ago talking about some of the specifics of things that can happen live, things that can happen asynchronously. Where should we start? Chris, what do you think we should be, where do we want to start here for folks?
Yeah, and I'm watching the chat kind of flip by here a little bit, and looks like we have a nice contingent of nursing faculty, as we always do, and some other med folks too. It looks like, and I could be wrong, and you guys should correct me in the chat, that most people look like there's some sort of a mix, right? The clinicals in person, or we're in person 1 day a week and we're home for 3. I know my kids' school are doing half days, a couple of days a week in person, and the rest online. 1 day completely dedicated to online is what the most recent iteration was. And so, there's a lot of different ways to do blended learning. And it looks like there's even a mix here, which is good. So I think we should probably talk a little bit about mixing it up and kind of figuring out what activities are best done online versus in person, where we have that, or what's synchronous versus asynchronous if you can't be live in person in the classroom like you usually are.
Okay, sounds good. And last week, or not last week, I guess it's been a few weeks now, but last time we joined together in a webinar, Chris and I, we missed you, but we made sure to remind folks to keep it simple, really focus on the things that can, not too much, be ready to be tech support. We also talked about learning objectives and being able to make sure we have clear expectations set for students in terms of how they can progress, not trying to do too much in the classroom. And today we get to talk about some of those specifics. So I'm going to say, I want to hear in the chat from all of you as we're diving into this. What plans have you already set? In other words, what have you already decided that this is something you're going to try? And then I think you're right, Chris. Why don't we just dive right into the different activities that maybe you wrote about and discuss them a little bit more clearly. So I want to start with a little bit more of the asynchronous. And the reason for that is because I think this is the part where we really haven't, as instructors, had to think about as much, just because we've had this ability to meet in person, right? But what are some of the things that we should be thinking about as instructors, as educators, to be able to be harnessing the power of async? Like how do we know students will even do it? Like what are some of the things that you have in mind to get us there?
Well, I think asynchronous can be really powerful, but I think sometimes in the press or in in the kids talk these days, right? Zoom classrooms kind of get a lot of the press, right? Because you're in person, and it had, there were pluses and minuses of that with security and different things like that. And it's one of those, once you do it and it's done well, it actually feels really good. When it's engineered and it's designed to be online, it doesn't feel as sort of, I don't want to say second class, but it feels good in a different way than in-person learning does. And it can still meet your needs, right? You can still absolutely master content asynchronously. And there are some things that I would argue are better done, right? Practice, individual question practice with explanations, going through the extra hassle, if you will, of writing explanations to answer choices that are right and wrong. So that when a student answers a question and they have feedback available, then they know, whether they got it right for the right reason, or if they just got lucky and guessed, or if they got it wrong for a predictable pattern. There's on Teachers Pay Teachers, or you could make one yourself, or I'm happy to engage with you a little bit on making them. We've been making a lot of them actually lately at Kaplan, on why did I miss it, right? Teaching students how to be better test takers and better learners by identifying error patterns when they go through an exam, and really spending the time reviewing and considering an exam or a quiz only complete after they go over it. That's something that we've started to double down on around here with our learners, because question practice is just so good for students, but it's like half the battle, right? They take the test, and that's a learning activity because it's got the effortful retrieval of going back and searching through kind of the card catalog of, do I know this? But then going on and learning from the explanation so they don't make that mistake again. So I think, doing the work on your part up front, and that's where asynchronous is harder, right? In some ways, because you have to plan ahead for how this is going to feel, how it's going to look. How many quiz items are you going to put up there, and how many videos are you going to pre-record? And I know that can be a lot of time up front, but I think it pays off in the engagement of the students. Wouldn't you agree, Chris?
Absolutely. An angle I'd love to throw in there in thinking on this is that we often associate asynchronous with solo, and that reflection time is really important. And especially when, as you put it in your blog, like the time varies and you need to apply the thinking creatively, or that why I missed it kind of thinking can take different amounts of time and needs to sort of have that space. But maybe a way that you can, and we often think of the synchronous activities as that's where community is, but you could think about ways where you could have people share some of their reflection or reflection exercises asynchronously into some kind of shared document or something like that. A few years ago, I took part in a workshop where everyone needed to, in a Google Doc, just type in their reflections along the way. And then what the instructor did that was so cool, and I'm just remembering this, but it was really good. The instructor invited us to look at somebody else's reflection and send them, if you find something that resonated with you, and that was the term he used. He said, if you see something that resonates with you, just send them an email, CC me. So there was accountability and there was community building, but it was all async. And it wasn't that much work on the instructor's part, which is part of the key here, is that it was just like, hey, those reflections also invite a share that can be public into some kind of Google Doc or something. And then, hey, we're all looking at each other. And what that actually did also was increase, I think, compliance with some of these solo activities. So it doesn't just have to be through our LMSs and us to our students. It can also be, hey, the students, it's kind of like all the way back to that old, like, switch your papers and grade each other's. But, you know, that looking for angles where a little bit of that kind of community can happen asynchronously might also help.
Yeah, I like the community angle. We've heard a lot from students about the desire to chat after class, and that usually happens live. Can't happen anymore. So that's also probably an area that we can facilitate and help provide an environment like a Slack, for example, or just an opportunity where you know, a discussion board on Canvas is another great way. I see Donna talking about having ongoing student engagement, which is great. Donna, I'd love if you could share that with, if you type to all panelists and attendees, everyone can share in your input there, which is great. But I really like that idea, Chris. And Chris Werner, back to you. I actually want to ask a question about that, because I thought it was an interesting choice to put remediation reflection in the async category, best done asynchronously. But hearing you talk about it makes more sense. I guess it's like, it really allows the student to digest at their own speed and at their own time, as long as you set the proper expectations. You know, what other, I guess, if we move on, like what are the other asynchronous activities that you think could really be?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things to get students engaged, and this may not be as applicable for you know, some of the you know, nursing and med programs, but maybe it is. But certainly in curricula where you're looking for students to kind of put their own spin on things and be a little creative, you know, asynchronous activities allow them to have more flexibility as learners in creating their own assignments and feedback. You know, tools like Flipgrid and you know, other video capture platforms, or you know, different audio platforms where they can record you know, music or different things like that, where you can make an assignment that's pretty broad and allow them to determine the kind of media and the kind of you know, product that they generate, allows for more feedback. And that's done offline independently, right? And then those platforms often, or if it's embedded in an LMS, allows other students to give feedback, you know, to Chris's point, about, hey, I really watched your video about how you built this thing. That's really cool. I like that too. And that works for younger kids. It works for high school. And it engages the brain in a different way than sort of watch a video, answer some questions, which is kind of, you know, the default, right? You want to be able to mix it up, make it engaging. And especially for high school kids and middle school, I know there's a couple middle school folks here at least, you know, where they're really kind of exploring what they want to do. Like, this can be really hard, right? Last spring, when we flipped to the, you know, remote learning, we already had relationships with students in the classroom before we went remote. So that they kind of, you know, it was about replicating what we had in class. It was about kind of continuing those relationships. And that's not the case this fall. I know there are many teachers who are looping with their classes, which is great when districts have been, you know, had the flexibility to do that. But for a lot of teachers, right, this is going to be the first time they've met these students, and it's going to be in an online environment, perhaps alone, or certainly less than it was in previous years. And certainly we kind of don't know, walking in the front door, what gaps were created in the spring and, you know, what that's going to mean. So that sort of uncertainty can also mean that students are more anxious. Like, I know teachers are more anxious, right? We all are. And so to be able to give them flexibility and creativity with some third-party open educational resources, you know, mix it up and allow students to create things on their own off cam, and then come back and kind of show who they are to their peers in a way where they feel confident. And I think, to the degree where we can take the guardrails off, I think that's going to give them some more permission to be creative and authentic in an environment that might feel a little bit forced and rigid when we first start out.
Yeah, I noticed in your blog also, you know, I just want to kind of focus in on the recording content piece. You talked about 15 minutes maximum for your content, chunking it up. Any other best practices from both of you? Because I see some comments in the chat around folks uploading to YouTube, and what
Yeah.
are some of the other guidelines that that would be helpful?
Yeah, Chris, I want to get your feedback on this, but the one thing I want to say about that is the caveat, right? I know for sure there are nursing and medical lectures that cannot be 15 minutes no matter what you do. I totally get it, totally fine. What I really mean by that is you want to be sure that you're giving them an opportunity to take a break and synthesize and reflect on what they've learned, attach it to something in long-term memory so they can remember it. And yeah, thanks, Lysandra. And that's exactly it, right? It's not that 15 minutes is super magic, but about after 15 minutes, if you stop and let them take stock of things, reflect and apply, that's going to help them retain it longer than, you can still do a 2-hour lecture, totally fine, whatever you have to do, but break it up, allow them to use that learning in the middle, or at least every so often, 15 minutes. I saw, somebody put in 20 minutes. That's fine. Just be sure you're giving them a time to cognitively take a pause. This learning isn't something you want to binge watch, right? You need to stop. You need to pause, and you need to be sure you're moving it from that sort of frontal lobe stuff that we talked about in the first webinar that we did to bring it, to the back, where it's like infinitely retrievable. Attach it to another memory. Think about how you would apply it. Think about how you'd use it clinically. Give them something to visualize and a different thing to do other than just listen to kind of the content that you're giving them.
That's totally great. I'm now thinking of binge watching. It's like, you don't want your students to break bad. Sorry, I was a Breaking Bad fan. First joke of the day. Sorry. But like the Pomodoro technique, right, for self-time management also revolves around the 20-minute, 25-minute sort of like kitchen timer, and then take that break, force yourself. We never did that. We didn't design that way for in-person because it was inefficient. We always could, let's build in breaks, but then you say, oh, well, we can't take as many breaks when we are literally getting all these people together in a lecture hall and then sending them on. So, the constraints of in-person forced us not to do that, to say like, okay, 90 minutes, 2 hours, sometimes even longer. When I was in business school, it was two and a quarter, and then 15 minute, 2 1/4, 15 minute. That was how it was all the way through. Let's think of designing for, at the very least, hybrid. It also gives the discipline that Chris, Dennis and I have been. I hope we've praised you enough on that. Like changing our minds around learning objectives, it really forces you to say, when you're breaking it up, like, what am I really going to accomplish in this 15 or 20-minute thing? And then it forces you to say, like, that's what I'm going to get at, right? I'm going to arc it. I'm going to narratively arc this thing in such a way that that's sort of the size, and then we get to this goal. Without that, just the time fills, right? So I would say it also helps keep us on the straight and narrow in that regard. I'm kicking that back to you with love, Chris, but I think that also is another benefit of the discipline around modularizing yourself as far as you can.
Are you taking that love? That kick? No. Am I okay? So, no.
All
You
the
good?
love, though, man. It's good. Yeah, all the love.
I was seeing if you'd receive it. It looks
No,
like
I agree with it. I've embraced it, and
So about a third of the way through our 20-minute chunk, I do want to kind of recap very briefly and just remind folks, the things you want to think about are, we're building new relationships now. So some of that can be done asynchronously ahead of time that can really help build a foundation for what you're looking for. That can be a simple intro video. It can be a simple introduction to the environment or to the expectations that you'll be setting all throughout the year, whether it's live, hybrid, or just in preparation for moving back online in the winter potentially. So being prepared and having students get comfortable is going to be important. I want to rehash a little bit from last time when we talked about learning objectives. You can view the recording of our webinar on our site or read the blog that Chris put together. But just having clear goals for what you're trying to accomplish in each activity that you're providing your student. And then I heard the word reflection a lot from both of you. Just this idea that it's not enough just to throw content at a student and see what sticks, but to carefully plan out remediation reflection. That is the I heard you, Chris, you say, without that, it's not complete. You have to make that part of the expectation of the entirety of whatever you're trying to get done here. And then just thinking about different ways to engage them through Flipgrid. I've seen people shout out Teams in the chat. Slack was one that I mentioned, and some other ways like discussion boards on Canvas or whatever LMS you're using to really give students a chance to do that connection after class that would normally happen in the hallway, but being able to facilitate that and make that part of the learning experience and the community experience to help folks feel more comfortable as they're moving forward. So I just want to make sure we covered all those things. I think Katie will share, it's already shared a recap, so on point, which is awesome. I see some of the things she's wrote there as well, which is great. And then why don't we now shift gears a little bit to more of, okay, all that we'll plan for, we'll get that in place, we'll set all that in stone. But how about the synchronous? How does that change? Is it more the same, or is it, what do we have to think about differently here, Chris?
I think sometimes it's obvious, right? Like synchronous is great because you can see people, like that can be great. And I did see a question earlier in the chat, and I wanted, Katie is so fantastic on our team. You guys don't see her typing furiously away behind the scenes, but somebody had asked about quality evaluations of the education that goes on in synchronous sessions, or you can use it for video as well. And we do a lot of that here. Dennis is well aware of that. He spends a lot of time with our teachers and evaluating them. And so we like Inacall a lot as sort of a clearinghouse. And don't ask me what the acronym stands for, but I've used their framework a lot in building out our evaluation rubrics. And so they have a nice sort of teacher competency framework that they use that you could absolutely go through and kind of dial in for some of your specific content needs and the way that your sessions are structured. And so Katie has thrown this in here for us. She's such a gift because I knew it. I was like, oh no, but I don't know where to find it, and I'm talking. So yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Katie, for that. So obviously synchronous sessions, you're together, that's great. And I'm gonna send love to Dennis here in a minute for welcoming questions to students, because I saw Barbara had a question about what do you do when you have new students and you're welcoming them into a session. And in synchronous, that's definitely, easier to do than it is asynchronously in some ways, right? I mean, you can record a video introducing yourself. I know I had to do that in one of my grad school classes, and then we all gave feedback, which you can do, and you can leave that up so that students can kind of remember who was that person from last week. And that's kind of a nice artifact to have. But when they come to synchronous session, right, everybody kind of brings with them where they are in the moment. And if they're anxious and all those things, there's no retakes, right? So be mindful when you're working with students that this is, again, stressful and still unprecedented, even if it's a little more familiar. And I think, the activities that you need to do together, especially if you're in person and then you're moving to online, or I know there are some districts that are doing like a couple of days in person and then sending everybody home. Be sure that you're thinking about prioritizing that rapport building and that relationship building that we had time to build all last fall. What can you do in person now? What can you do in a synchronous session early on that's kind of similar, right? Like, what do you do to engage students so they know who's in their classroom with them? And that's where synchronous can really shine. So Dennis, what do you have for when students come into the room? I have been asked weird icebreaker questions like, what's your favorite food? What's the last movie you've seen? Like, what are your magic bullets? Because I think Dennis teaches more high school kids that may or may not want to be there than any of us.
Okay, well, first of all, we do have a blog on this too. We have a blog on everything at this point, I think, right? And so Katie, maybe you can dig this up and share out some of the ways to get folks comfortable. I think that was one of our earlier ones in the online environment. But whether it's online or in person, one thing I would just warn you is don't expect them to do too much right off the bat. I think that's one way you can kind of, okay, let me frame that a little bit more carefully. You definitely want them to try out the tools that they have available to them, right? But try to find comfortable, low-lift ways in order to do so. And sometimes that can be a simple type of a simple letter, right? So for example, like, give me a Y in the chat if you can hear me. I mean, don't do that now, but that gives the students now they know where the chat is. Now they know that they can participate in that activity, and it gives you confirmation that this is something where, okay, great. at least video, audio, check, right? And so little opportunities like that can lead into more. I think a lot of students don't expect to be cared about. I think a lot of students get into an online environment and don't expect to get individual attention. And the more you're able to shout them out, the more you're able to give them acknowledgement of what they're doing. And I'm kind of not doing a great job of that today. There's just so many good tips coming here, but my fellow colleagues, I think, have been shouting out folks throughout. I think it gives them more encouragement that, okay, what I do matters. What I do actually contributes to the environment that we're in. And once you can help them understand that that's happening, that's when you'll see a much more engaged audience. Because without that, it kind of feels like, okay, is this just a video I'm watching? Is this just something where I'm hanging back? But the more you see that there actually is active learning happening, I think that is something that's powerful. And then Krista, I'm going to kick it to you because I know you do a lot with our institutional programs, and I'd love to hear some of the strategies.
Yeah, I love your point. I'll just echo it because I'm always broken records, even though our so few students these days know even what a record is, but I'll go ahead and say it. Broken record on keep it simple, but like crack the seal on those tools. Totally. Like when they're engagement tools, you don't have to that doesn't set up expectations that you're going to use every single tool in every single which way. That's not it. I'm very much a fan of keep it simple, but crack the seal on the chat. Crack the seal on if you have a class that's small enough to get people talking, and ideally on camera, even if it's before class. Kind of like think of it that especially that first class you're having is you're hosting a party. You might not have chosen to have the party this way, but you're having a socially distanced barbecue. So show up early, start talking to people, be a little bit more chatty than in both allowed in any other way. Go ahead and break ice. It matters less. The like one that I used, I've used a lot thinking of your question, Chris, of what are my go-to with college students or beyond is often something from their childhood. Like tell me a favorite character from a book or movie or TV show or anything. Or game. Everyone's done something. And then what you'd hear the class going, and this could be 100 people who just sort of met each other and they're making some connections with each other. And it takes a while, and you can say like, we're just going to do 10 this time, 10 another time, that sort of thing. If you're in a large class, at least connect, find ways to create study groups or just like partnerships. So you're not like, especially for a large group, how can someone feel like, oh, I'm not just a number in the background, how I'm not just sitting in the back, but literally I'm here. The collective activity that we so often don't do in in-person large classes is really important here, of like everybody sort of like doing something together. In some ways we can do that better online. Be sure to do that. The collective action matters. Polls, chat, etc.
And just one other thing I'll throw in there, and I feel like the dots are starting to connect and with all the different things we've kind of put out there as content. But when we had Chris from NYT on, our third Chris, we talked a little bit more about kind of bringing the environment to them as well. So in other words, he would, you don't always have to have a perfect background. You don't always have to feel like you have to be the perfect figure of authority. And in fact, that can also be deterrents to helping students feel comfortable. Show them some of your humanity, right? And what I mean by that is don't be afraid to be genuine with them, acknowledge some of the challenges that you will be facing personally, and invite them to the environment that you're teaching from. I think that can help students feel like they're more part of the experience as well. And so again, like I think setting expectations, I think thinking about the rapport and thinking about the community building as a priority is important. And the ways you can do that is be real, right? I think you can't manufacture that, right? I love the little icebreaker things you just talked about, Chris, but don't force it, right? Keep it simple. Really just, get to the place where you'd be surprised how students will engage with you online. A lot of you already went through this already once, but I think there's going to be a lot that you'll see in terms of once you get students understanding that they're part of the experience. But what else? What else? Go ahead, Christopher.
I think, building on what we were talking about with Chris from NYIT, and talking about kids needing to be seen, right? It's part of that shout out. But also, I think one thing that we've talked a lot about is using a check-in poll when they come in first thing, asking them how they're doing and if there's anything they want you to know, having an open-ended feedback there so that you can kind of judge what you're dealing with. It's like a baby formative assessment of, oh man, everybody's really stressed out today, or they're not ready to go, or what is my synchronous session going to look like as an educator will vary depending on the moods of my students, right? Like everybody knows that in the classroom, and some days are just not worth it and you give up and you have them, do some other activity. That can be the way it is with synchronous sessions too. And finding that out earlier rather than halfway through when nobody's engaging in the chat and everybody's flaking out is much better for everybody involved, right? Address the elephants in the room if they're addressable, and understand why some students may not be participating, if they're having personal struggles or whatever. So that kind of anonymous, when you come in, like check in saying you're ready to go, just answer the question, talk about it when students are coming in, put yourself on mute, turn on your camera. It's nice to see you, Tom. Be sure you answer the polls. Hey guys, or having a slide up that says those things, generate warmth in the beginning and you'll have better buy-in. Andrea, you're a woman after my own heart. There's so much chemistry that goes on in the kitchen. I was a chemistry and physics teacher. So yeah, I absolutely love that. I think showing them your environment where you can and you feel comfortable is great. And it builds on the honesty that Dennis was talking about. I think one of the things too that you can do with a synchronous session that you may not think about it as formally is just really being about expectation settings in Q&A. And every so often having a session where there's not really a super agenda for the synchronous sessions, but that you're answering questions about the things that you've put online and that there's clear expectations around due dates on projects and where to go for research and where students are struggling, and sort of this kind of less formal but more open kind of sense of, where are we going in the course, and where are you guys struggling, and are the tools online working, right? You may not know that if you don't give them a forum to really be able to address it with you. And so having kind of those, let's check in, how's the project going? You don't want to find out that something's not working right until too late because everybody procrastinated, right? Give them the opportunity, tell them what, maybe set a little bit of expectation, right? Like, hey, we're going to talk about use the library, make sure you guys can all get on, and then really be sure that you can follow up or direct them if they need help in getting their projects done. Over communication is something that we talk about a lot in online learning. So talking about it in a synchronous session, making it an announcement in your LMS, sending it out in an email, like being redundant, you'll feel like you're over redundant, if that's a thing. Too redundant.
Department of Redundancy Department.
I could be the president of redundancy. I don't know. But you just want to be sure that you're using and hitting them with every communication channel you have, because while they're using sort of their intrinsic load for learning, the extrinsic in this still pandemic plagued world is huge, right? So getting through over and over and over and over, that sort of spaced repetition and reminding is not a bad thing to do.
Right. It's sort of forced multi-modality on us. Let's not try to be so efficient and try to do so many things as like, oh, but I covered that completely in that wonderful 15-minute thing I recorded, right? You didn't see the whole thing, and it might feel like, gosh, I'm covering. That's okay. That's what we should be doing. And I really responded, Chris, to the point in your blog around tying things together. And, to the degree that we are doing this online rather than in person, I think those same kind of moments that we've had in both as educators and as students ourselves, think back to amazing experiences you had in the classroom. Did they could those things have happened online? If assuming that it probably happened face to face? Yes, those things could happen. I'm thinking, did I tell you all about the contact lenses for chickens case from business school? Oh, this is a great one. So back in business school, there's a business case about contact lenses for chickens. And you're like, what? This is a marketing case. And it turns out that this was a thing, contact lenses, to help the chickens not see so well, so they wouldn't peck each other. And you go through the whole business case, and all of us did figuring out how much to price these contact lenses for, you know, like what to price them at, and here's what the benefit was going to be, and da da da. And finally, someone raised their hand and said, "Who's going to buy these? What farmer is going to put the contact lenses in their chickens' eyes?" And it led to this whole product adoption cycle. And like, yes, we had some crazy vanguard that was willing to do it, that did our market research with, but we didn't realize, like most farmers would say, I'm not risking my chicken's eyes, and I'm not that good at putting contact lenses in my own eyes. So like, so I still remember that moment decades later of, we were all going down the one path, and then Eric raised his hand and sent us, and we all realized, poof, the bubble burst, right? That only happens synchronously, on this theme of like, what can happen asynchronously, what happens synchronously. It was because we had that whole collective that it was like this big gasp in the room. It's why people want to go to movies again one day, and why drive-ins are back, and people can't wait to, and are trying to get together in the face of, you know, let's go ahead and look for those moments. Doesn't have to, I don't remember much else from that marketing class, to be honest, but I remember that. And that really affected me. And I learned the product adoption cycle through that moment. So let's just, you know, while we keep it simple, I would say, take out all the other things. If I were talking to that marketing professor now, I'd say, take out everything else that you were doing. Center around that contact lenses for chickens moment, which you probably orchestrated really well and led us all down the garden path. And then boom, we hit the wall and came back. That's memorable, only memorable in a synchronous environment. You can do it online.
Make it an opportunity, make it a place for feedback, right? Which ties to, Chris, the section in your blog where you talk about activities where immediate feedback is needed. Like, who the heck would put contact lenses in their chicken's eyes, right? Something along those lines. I don't know how we got there, but we got there. Only with you, Chris. But in any case, I do think that, for me, makes a ton of sense that you absolutely reserve time the same way for asynchronous activities, you think about the reflection or remediation. For synchronous activities, thinking about that collaborative feedback that could happen asynchronously, but will be much more effective in a group setting, where if you create the space for it, you'll see students be able to not only share feedback on their own work, but maybe even on the entire process itself, right? And course correct as necessary, right? Chris? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and I saw some people early on when we were first logging in today, talking about flipped classroom, right? Which generally is, you know, you do all the video stuff, you know, by yourself, and then you come and you do the application and the synthesis and the higher level stuff together. Well, you may not have the opportunity to do that in person, but there's no reason you can't kind of treat a synchronous online session in a similar manner, right? You save kind of the content that can be digested and pre-recorded pretty straightforwardly for asynchronous, right? So they digest the video, and then when they come, think about breakout groups. Think about you know, formative, quick questions that you can get from them to be sure that they're on track with their learning. And I think, you know, that instantaneous feedback is good for you as well as and faculty, because you want to know if, you know, just like the due dates on projects, if the library link isn't working that you put up, you also want to know if there's not a solid understanding. And especially for those of you who teach in the medical profession, where there's going to be a clinical application of the stuff that they're learning, you obviously want to be sure that it's scaffolding in the right way, and that whether it's foundational content that then translates into a skill that they need to be able to build upon and be able to activate, you want to be sure that that foundation is being built in a solid way, and that those the content videos that you're creating are working, right? And so you can do that by asynchronous assessment, which is great, but getting them into a synchronous session and thinking about how they use that, how they communicate it to their peers, and reflecting back to you whether they're moving forward is so key to keeping your syllabus on track.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
I wanted to throw out there also one way in which online has an advantage over in-person, at least traditional in-person, is synchronous anonymous. That's hard to do in a physical classroom without, that's not technology enabled, unless you're actually getting people on devices. Like, okay, how many people understood what I just said? Everyone, you know, like, or, you know, you can get synchronous in person, you know, sort of give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, sort of keep it close. But it's by definition kind of not anonymous unless you're using devices. So embrace that. It gives such a good insight into what your students are really getting and really not. When you have some good synchronous but anonymous polls, people will open up, whether it's polls or any other tech tool. Recently, I've been teaching some growth mindset sessions, and right from the outset, what kind of big catastrophic thoughts are you pre-dental students having? And people are writing in knowing that it's anonymous. They're sharing directly with us, I'm afraid I'm not good enough to get into dental school, or whatever it is. And I don't think any of them would have done that in public chat, let alone raise their hand and say, you know what, I don't think I'm good enough to go to dental school. But amazingly, and they just met me, so there's some power in some of the tools that we don't want to underestimate, that and Synchronous allows you to then respond in real time.
I like that. So we're about 2/3 of the way through. So here's what I'm hearing as themes so far. Both of you correct me if I've gone astray, but live, right? Immediate feedback. No, so too meta. Asynchronous activities should be short, chunk with clear goals. Think about how to introduce and build in that reflection and the remediation that students need, that they'll do individually. But also don't forget that they need a platform in which they can share it out and connect. And that kind of takes us to the synchronous activities, where we can really focus in on the collaborative, really focus in on the feedback that happens live, focus on getting students comfortable, getting students just feeling like they're part of the team. And I want to shout out real quickly, Jackie shared, Jackie, I love you shared this with all panelists and attendees. Jackie says, as a psychiatric nurse educator, I had a sharing time with students to state 2 positive and 2 negative issues attributed to the COVID pandemic in April, and how that helped delay anxiety and foster the resilience. That feels so real, right? And so relevant. And it doesn't feel, that feels, I mean, it's a lot, but it's, if you find an opportunity to share it, I think that can be really, really, really powerful. And Susan, I love what you talked about, how, this story that you shared about the apples, which feels a lot better than chickens and contact lenses. But any way to keep students connected, there are opportunities we can do that within a synchronous environment. And Katie, of course, will share the check-ins, to provide opportunities to reflect back and use anonymous. I missed that, Chris, sorry. The anonymity that you can leverage to help students feel really, really comfortable weighing in different topics. So, okay. So then our last third, and how do we tie it all together, right? Like, let's say we've given folks, we've got a lot of suggestions from folks in the chat. I hope folks are jotting them down, thinking about their own programs that they're planning ahead for. And I hope this has been helpful in helping you get a sense of how you can structure out what your program looks like and build it for the possibility of having to go online halfway through the semester or vice versa. Okay, so how do we put it together? How do we bring that all together, right? Like, what are some of the guidelines we should have in place? Like, we have a lot of themes continue to keep floating out. Keep it simple. Make sure that you don't ask too much of your students right off the bat. Last time, actually, Chris, maybe we can touch upon this one more time. We talked about, do we need to front load the content, right? Do we need to take advantage of any live time, in-person time that we have in preparation for the winter, the way, winterize our courses and to some effect, right? Like, so what are some of the, let's rehash some of these guidelines and some of the ways that we can help support our educators.
Yep. Real quick, Pauline just asked, how do you do anonymous response in Zoom? And in the chat, you can privately chat people individually. So we keep telling you guys, set it to all panelists and attendees so everyone benefits from your input. But if you just wanted to chat me, if you click on the button there, you can pick. So
only try it out, actually.
Yeah, you can just say hey to Dennis.
Right. So there's not a good way to like show, you have to cut and paste or like comment on them, is kind of we have been doing. But yeah, the private chat and public chat are 2 very different modes, and they're both really useful.
Much so. Yeah, and it's interesting because at Kaplan, when we teach online, we have off-cam folks manning the chat, just like Katie is today. And what we've noticed over the years is that when we have schools that partner with us to deliver, review courses that we teach, that a lot of the students that would normally struggle and feel nervous about commenting, to Chris's point, will privately chat our off-camera folks throughout the whole class. And it actually has become a preferred way of instruction for a lot of our partners, because they say, man, those students that don't engage aren't wallflowers online. Like, they are absolutely engaged the whole time, and where they wouldn't be maybe brave enough to raise their hand and say, I just don't understand that concept, they're perfectly willing to chat it privately, knowing that somebody on the other side will write right back and say, oh, here's what you need to understand. And then they'll just dump back into paying attention to the main speaker when they feel comfortable. And so that's not always possible when you don't have off camera, but for some of you who are teaching at university, if you have TAs or people that can help you, giving them a quick, like, hey, can you monitor the chat for me? And just let them know how somebody can chat them privately can be a huge lift if you have that capability. I think in terms of tying it together, I think, again, it's already August, unbelievably, but what you can do to pre-plan will make your life better. Like, the more asynchronous content you can kind of store up, the better off you'll be in terms of having backup plans if things kind of go off the rails. But I think also just really being conscious of the decisions you're making, right? So the things you're asking students to do, let them know why. We talked a lot about andragogy early on. How can you give students the ability to make that trade-off mentally? Like, this is going to be good for me because it's going to help me be successful in clinical next week, or it's going to help me understand what I need to do to complete the assignment next week, or whatnot. I think, there's always going to be stuff that goes wrong. I think the light humor that you can have, like Chris's terrible jokes and chickens and contact lenses, those sorts of things become memorable when things don't go right? Like, being able to roll with it, being able to pivot, not getting stressed out with your, in front of your students when things go awry. Those become some of the funnier and more memorable moments in your class, when you treat them with like it's 2020, man, what do you want? Like, everything's going wrong this year. So the session didn't launch right, and we had to pivot, and we had to, email a different link, or we had to figure out something. Like, just show them your resilience to the best of your ability and help them develop their resilience too. I mean, this year is growing people in ways that we will be looking at for years. I'm sure all those psychologists will be studying it forever, and sociologists, but I think living through it is an important thing. It'll be definitional for these students. I know in the spring, when we interviewed the different educators, that was what they were saying. Like, we lived through 9/11 when we were younger, and it pivoted our lives, right? Like, my parents remember where they were when JFK was shot, kind of in the same way. Students are going to remember being, sent home from school and never going back to see their friends that semester. And so your place, just like it was this spring, is like an anchor and a cornerstone to some sort of sense of normalcy, even if this isn't your familiar environment. And so you become a trusted resource for them. And so the way that you handle things when they go bananas becomes important for them too, no matter how old the student is.
Gosh, yeah. I didn't want to have to be like as mature as that, Chris. I didn't want to have but it's those of us who are parents and so forth, like, gosh, being tested this way, we didn't ask for it, but here we are. And here we are with the crisis continuing. Okay, we're all living it together. So let's stay real in it together, and keep the students reaching out to each other. I keep coming back to keep it simple. I know I'm throwing out the weird analogies and the things, but like, at the end of the day, just like you said, Chris, like, your trusted anchor. We're in caring profession. And so, your students will know you care about them. And it's kind of all the resiliency research seems to show it's like high candor and high care. It's like, you really are going to hold them to a standard, and you're going to hold yourself to a standard and face the brutal facts and be real and rigorous. And at the same time, optimistic and hopeful and positive and empathetic. So like, juggling that at the same time, that's what's got to come through. And then you can kind of roll with the punches, the tech hiccups, the intros that don't go as smoothly, and someone saying, wait, can you hear me now? And your internet's going in and out, and okay, we'll get through.
I'll just say I've been through kind of, I've been doing this for about 14 years now, teaching in a virtual classroom. And the world has changed a lot since we started. But, I always go back to just the idea of learning objectives. If you have a clear goal in mind and you set those goals, for your students and share with them transparently, and no matter what happens in between, if you can get to the end and show that they've been able to meet that goal, meet that objective, I think there's just that really helps connect the dots for the students, and don't try to do too much, right? Take it step by step. One thing I want to touch upon before we move on, I saw in the chat a folk, who was it? It was Kelly, who was talking about maybe there's a need for even more anonymity than online provides, right? So there's an opportunity to chat to your teacher without the other students seeing, and maybe there needs to be a greater check-in, an opportunity for a student to, share their concerns without any fear of, whatever, a lot can go through a student's mind especially if they're sharing feedback about the process that the instructor has set out for them. So I will say, I do think it's not a bad practice to have, through Google or SurveyMonkey or whatever it is, set up an opportunity to check in with students and give them the option to not share who they are. Don't be, how do I say this? Don't worry about the feedback that's going to come in, because at the end of the day, it's all going to be a learning experience for everyone involved. And the more that you can hear from your students and the more you can make it comfortable for them to share with you how they're doing, how they're feeling, what their experience has been, if you can gear it in terms of how the students are walking through this whole thing, you'll find that it'll be a lot easier to think about how you're structuring the program ahead. That's always, I have to remind myself that all the time. There's an ideal, there's something that I want to do as an instructor, but I always have to force myself to think, what are the students experiencing? What are the problems that they're facing? How do I bring that to life for the students rather than trying to achieve whatever, grand, vision that I have for the perfect classroom experience? I always have to remind myself of that. So
I don't want to have to remind myself of that, but as one of as one of our colleagues put it to me once, he said, good news is there are only 4 or 5 lessons you got to learn in life. The bad news is you got to keep relearning them. I mean, it's spaced repetition on steroids all through life, right? And one of them is the expert trap. Like, we're in a caring profession and we're in a teaching profession. So we become experts, and we love to learn, and we also love to teach. And we have this stuff we want to share, and whatever stuff is that, and that's our job, right? And it's really hard. It's so hard to remember what it was like not to know that stuff, what it was like to not feel a certain way about the material, whatever it is. The longer I've been in teaching and in this profession, in a way, the harder it is, and the more wake ups I need to, like, well, I think I know what the students want and what they are, how they see things, and really I don't. So coming back to keeping it simple, learning objectives, really trying to look at it through their eyes.
And I think, in looking at wrapping it up almost here, we're getting to the end of our time. We've talked a lot about students. We've talked a lot about how the world is still under stress. And I think it's wise to think about how you're still under stress too, right? And self-care and kind of pacing yourself so burnout does not become a thing before Halloween. It's still very, very uncommon. That's not really a thing, but it's still unprecedented times, right? And I think really being conscious, and you guys are here today, so obviously you're thinking about this next semester and how quickly it's going to be here, if it's not already here. I think really, making space to do the things that nurture your soul, that help remember why you got into education in the first place. A lot of that is probably relationship driven, right? I know my favorite experiences now, having not been in the classroom for a little bit, is when I run into a student who says, hey, remember when this happened in your class and how funny that was and whatever. And like those relationships I still count as pretty awesome. And when they're having babies and they send you an announcement online, or they invite you to their wedding, and like those things that you know, the seeds that you've planted are sprouting all over the place. And you still have the opportunity to do that this fall, even though it feels like the ground is a little shifty and maybe not as fertile as it was. It still is. And they're still coming to you for learning, right? They still want to know from your expertise. And you know, to Chris's point, it can be hard to put yourself in their shoes. It can be hard to be in our shoes right now. But I think really thinking about being intentional about taking care of yourself and really remembering, you know, your calling as an educator. I really feel like it's that, because certainly none of you are millionaires, or us either. You know, we're here for a purpose. And I think being really, really sold on that, and taking time to step away from the computer, setting really clear boundaries. You know, this spring, if one thing we heard loud and clear is, man, students were texting me at midnight. Okay, fine. Turn your phone off. Don't reply. Tell them you will hear from me between, you know, 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. Or, you know, if you're noon to 9 or whatever you are, just set it, put it online, over communicate that too. You know, I love you guys. I'm in your corner, but I need time for me too. That shows them healthy boundaries and what they should expect for school too. You know, it's really important that you stay on your feet, because they're going to need you and you're going to need them. And we're going to get through this next year, just like we did this spring.
That's awesome, Chris. Before Chris, I want to get to your final thoughts, but before I do, just really quickly, we had I think it was Terry type in that Terry shares less stories because you know, Terry can't see the students' faces, and so she, you know, Terry doesn't know how this lands, I guess, the story itself. So I just want to share in a practical way. You know, I have the same dilemma. I have plenty of chicken contact stories up my sleeve, you know, that have very varying different purposes. I would say the question I would just ask yourself is like, what's the goal, right? Like, this time is precious when you're thinking about being online, because it's not like, you know, yes, there's flexibility, but there's going to be less of it than you're going to have in person. And so just really, you know, I don't want to discourage you from telling the stories. You should tell the stories. I think stories have such a great way to connect content to the practical, to the real, to what's actually happening in a clinical space. So, but as long as you can say there's a goal to this and there's something that I want the students to get out of it, then that's your green light. And I think if you really want to hear from students their feedback, you can just ask them for it, and I'm sure they'll be glad to give it to you. So anyway,
that's actually what I was going to come on to talk about, also responding to this question. So quickly, I don't think I would have shared the contact lenses for chicken stories if it weren't for you two, Chris and Dennis. You know, like, it needed a panel, you know, because I needed to see your like rolling eyes and all that. So something that with one seminar that happened this spring that we did with some pre-med students was, we had some students on. This was about mindfulness, and I was moderating. We had the mindfulness expert on, and we had two students, one of whom had looked up mindfulness online in Google the day before, knew nothing at all about it. And they were kind of our students to talk to and be the recipients. And so I wonder, are there ways that you can invite certain students pre-planned ahead of time? Hey, for 15 minutes in my next thing, could you be on camera with me? And I want to talk to you about a story and get your feedback. There's no, like, you know, think about, maybe there's some ways to do some things like that where you create your own little panels. Those would take pre-planning, because it would be pretty stressful for students who are being graded and all that sort of thing. But there might be some ways to incorporate stories that way, where you don't feel like you're just talking into the void.
I love it. I love it. Okay, it is 3:59. I'm sure Katie has a final wrap up. And thank you all for participating, for joining, for sharing. As always, your tips for all the other educators in the room. Thank you for always being a part of this community. It's such a joy. Chris Murner is having ankle surgery tomorrow. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't share that, but who cares? I have to believe you scheduled it specifically so you'd be able to make it today, which I'm so thankful for, as always. So in any case, we will join you next time, and in a couple of weeks we'll have another blog about putting it all together, and hopefully we can help you get to the finish line of planning, and I know some of you are already starting in a couple of days. So Best of luck, and we'll be in touch, and we'll, hang in there. Self-care, make sure you help the students focus on what they can control. Let's get through this together. Thank you all for joining. This is Dennis and the Chris is signing off. We'll see you next time.